The billionaire screamed, "Control my son or get out," and the room froze. His 8-year-old boy was spiraling deeper into sensory meltdown, unreachable. Then a waitress from the Jordanian desert knelt beside him, her voice carrying an ancient Bedouin lullaby no one in that restaurant had ever heard. What happened next brought the entire room to silence. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. This wasn't a random tantrum. Omar Al-Mansur was 8 years old, diagnosed with severe autism at 3, and trapped inside a nervous system that turned the restaurant's clinking glasses and chandelier glare into physical pain. His father, Khalid, had spent years building a real estate empire worth over $9 billion, yet could not spend a quiet evening with his own son without the world staring. That night at Dubai's most exclusive waterfront restaurant, every failed attempt to soothe Omar only deepened the truth Khalid had buried beneath private jets and boardroom victories. Money could not fix this. His outburst, "Control my son or get out," was not arrogance. It was a confession of defeat, and the waitress who dared to approach Amira recognized defeat when she saw it. She had grown up watching it in the eyes of refugees her grandmother healed in the Jordanian desert. Now, with an ancient Bedouin lullaby, she was about to reveal that the peace Khalid sought could not be bought, it had to be sung. Amira Bishara was 6 years old the first time she saw her grandmother calm a screaming child with nothing but her voice. It was the middle of the night in the Wadi Rum desert, the kind of darkness that swallowed everything except the stars, and a Bedouin family had arrived at their tent camp, carrying a toddler who had not stopped crying for 3 days. The child was inconsolable, rigid with a terror no one understood. A doctor from the nearest town, hours away, had prescribed sedatives that did nothing. The grandmother, Rashid as everyone called her, took the boy into her arms and began to hum, not just any melody, an ancient tune passed down through generations of desert healers, its slow, undulating rhythm designed to sync with a distressed nervous system. Within 10 minutes, the boy was asleep. Amira never forgot that. She would spend the next 2 decades learning everything her grandmother knew about the body's hidden pathways to calm. Rashid was not a doctor. She had never seen the inside of a medical school. What she possessed was something far older, the accumulated wisdom of Bedouin tribes who had survived for centuries in one of Earth's harshest environments, without hospitals, without pharmacies, without any safety net except each other. They understood sensory overload long before modern psychology gave it a name. The desert, with its howling winds, its blinding sun, its sudden sandstorms that could disorient even the most experienced travelers, was a sensory assault in itself. To survive, you had to learn how to soothe a rattled mind. The lullaby was just one technique in a vast repertoire that included specific pressure points, breathing patterns, and a deep understanding of rhythm as medicine. Amira learned them all. By the time she was 15, she had helped her grandmother treat dozens of children and adults in crisis. She never imagined those skills would one day matter beyond the desert's edge, but war reshuffles everything. When conflict erupted in Syria and spilled across borders, Jordan absorbed millions of refugees. Amira's family lost their grazing lands to drought and encroaching development. The ancient way of life was dissolving. At 22, Amira made the decision that countless young people from struggling regions make. She would go to the Gulf, find work, send money home. Dubai glittered on television screens like a promise. She arrived in 2019 with a tourist visa that she overstayed, joining the vast invisible workforce that keeps the city's luxury machine running. Her first job was cleaning rooms at a 3-star hotel in Deira. She worked 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, for less than $400 a month. She never complained. Compared to the uncertainty of the desert, a paycheck was stability. By 2023, Amira had upgraded to a position at La Pearl, one of Dubai's most exclusive waterfront restaurants. The tips were better, the clientele unimaginably wealthy. She served sheikhs, tech moguls, European royalty, and the occasional Hollywood celebrity. She perfected the art of invisibility, the ability to anticipate needs without being seen, to clear plates and refill glasses as if by magic. It was a skill that came naturally to someone who had spent her childhood reading the unspoken cues of the vulnerable. And it was at La Perle, on a Thursday evening in late September, that she encountered a boy whose suffering she recognized instantly. Khalid Al-Mansur had built his fortune the hard way. Unlike the Gulf's old money families whose wealth stretched back through oil dynasties, Khalid started with nothing. His father drove a taxi. His mother cleaned offices in Sharjah. They lived in a two-room apartment with cracked walls and an air conditioner that failed every summer. But Khalid had something his circumstances could not crush, an obsessive drive to escape. He earned a scholarship to study engineering in London. He worked construction jobs during summers, sending half his earnings home. By 30, he had launched a real estate development firm focused on affordable housing for expatriate workers. By 40, that firm had expanded into luxury properties, hotels, and commercial towers across 3 continents. By 55, Khalid Al-Mansur was worth $9.3 billion, with a seat on the boards of banks and a private jet that could cross the Atlantic without refueling. But here is what the Forbes profile did not mention. In 2014, when Khalid was at the peak of his expansion into European markets, his wife Layla gave birth to their first and only child, Omar. The pregnancy had been difficult. The delivery was emergency. And within the first 2 years, Layla noticed something that Khalid, consumed by business, initially dismissed. Omar did not make eye contact. He did not respond to his name. He would spend hours arranging toys by color and size rather than playing with them. Loud noises, even the vacuum cleaner, sent him into inconsolable screaming fits. At 2.5, a specialist in London confirmed what Layla already suspected. Omar had autism spectrum disorder, severe presentation, with significant sensory processing challenges. Khalid's response was typical of a man who had solved every previous problem with money. He hired the best therapists. He flew in specialists from Boston and Stockholm. He converted an entire floor of their Palm Jumeirah mansion into a sensory-friendly environment with controlled lighting, soundproofing, and custom equipment. But autism does not answer to wealth. Omar's world remained a chaotic storm of overwhelming input. A shopping mall was impossible. A family gathering was torture. And as Omar grew older, the gap between his chronological age and his developmental needs widened into a chasm that Khalid did not know how to bridge. Layla became Omar's primary interpreter, the only person who could consistently soothe him. Then, in early 2023, Layla was diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia. Within 6 months, she was gone. Khalid was left alone with a son he loved desperately but had never truly understood. The housekeepers and nannies handled daily routines, but the emotional connection, the ability to calm Omar during a meltdown, the intuitive understanding that Layla had possessed, that was gone. Khalid tried to fill the void with presence. He cut his work hours. He attended every therapy session. He read books on autism, on sensory processing, on communication strategies. But on the night he decided to take Omar to La Perle, he was still a man flailing in dark water, unable to reach the shore. The restaurant itself was a sensory nightmare for a child like Omar. La Perle's design won architectural awards for its dramatic impact. Walls of cascading water, crystal installations that refracted light into ever-shifting patterns, a sound system that layered ambient electronica beneath the murmur of wealthy patrons. To most diners, it was breathtaking. To Omar, it was an assault. The flickering reflections moved unpredictably. The ambient hum had frequencies that grated against his hypersensitive auditory processing. The smell of grilled seafood, normally restrained, overwhelmed his olfactory system. Within 15 minutes of being seated, Omar began rocking in his chair. Khalid, alert to the signs, tried to redirect him with a tablet and headphones, but the tablet's screen brightness added to the visual chaos, and the headphones failed to block the low-frequency thrum that vibrated through the floor. The rocking intensified. Then came the humming, an anxious, self-soothing sound that grew louder. Other diners began to glance over. The manager, a polished Frenchman named Marcel, approached the table with careful diplomacy. "Mr. Al-Mansur, is everything all right? Can I assist in some way?" Khalid assured him everything was fine, but everything was not fine. Omar's humming escalated to sharp vocalizations. His hands flapped with increasing violence. The tablet clattered to the floor. Khalid felt 24 pairs of eyes drilling into him. He was not just a father struggling with his child. He was Khalid Al-Mansur, the billionaire whose name appeared in newspapers, whose face was recognized by half the room. And in that moment, the humiliation was absolute. He grabbed Omar's arm, perhaps too firmly, and hissed a command that only made things worse. The boy's distress spiraled into a full autonomic storm, screaming, thrashing, knocking over a water glass that shattered across the marble floor. The restaurant went silent. Marcel hurried back, his diplomatic mask slipping. "Sir, I must ask you to calm the situation, or we will need to ask you to step outside." It was then that Khalid spoke the words that would echo across social media within hours: "Control my son or get out." He did not mean the boy, he meant Marcel, but the ambiguity was damning and the tone was unmistakable. It was the voice of a man at the end of his rope. And as Marcel stammered a reply, a young waitress in a pressed white blouse stepped out from the service station, her eyes fixed not on the billionaire, but on the child writhing beside him. Amira had recognized the meltdown for what it was: sensory overload, the same storm she had seen 100 times in the desert camps, the same rigid panic that Rashid had calmed with nothing but a melody. She did not ask permission. She did not hesitate. She walked directly to Omar, lowered herself to his eye level, and began to hum. The tune was ancient, a Bedouin lullaby that had traveled across centuries, its cadence slow and steady like a heartbeat heard through warm sand. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the chaos like a blade of light. Omar's screaming faltered. His thrashing slowed. The entire restaurant, frozen moments earlier, now held its breath as the impossible unfolded before them. And Khalid Al-Mansur, who had spent a decade trying to buy his son's peace, watched a stranger give it to him for free. Omar's hands, which had been beating against the table seconds earlier, went still. His breathing, ragged and desperate, began to slow. The ancient melody curled through the chaos like smoke through a keyhole, and the boy who had been unreachable for almost 20 minutes was now tracking Amira's face with eyes that had lost their wild panic. She did not reach for him. She did not speak. She simply hummed, letting the lullaby do what Bedouin grandmothers had understood for centuries. The human nervous system, when drowning in sensory input, can be anchored by a predictable rhythm. The song had no lyrics, just a rising and falling cadence that mimicked the maternal heartbeat, the same sound a baby hears in the womb, the same frequency that signals safety to the oldest parts of the brain. Khalid stood frozen. He had hired specialists from 3 continents, paid $50,000 a month for intensive therapy, installed equipment that rivaled a neurological clinic, and none of it had ever worked this fast. His cheeks were wet. He did not remember starting to cry. The silence in La Perle was so complete that when a fork clinked against a plate at a distant table, it rang out like a gunshot. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Everyone understood, on some primal level, that they were witnessing something remarkable. Marcel, the manager whose polished composure had crumbled into panic minutes ago, now stood with his mouth slightly open. He had seen everything in his 20 years managing Dubai's most demanding restaurants: marriage proposals, business deals, celebrity tantrums, even one medical emergency, but never a waitress singing a billionaire's child into stillness. His phone was in his hand, the emergency services number already half-dialed. He lowered it slowly. Amira continued humming for another 2 minutes, watching Omar's body language with the practiced eye of someone who had done this many times before. When his shoulders finally dropped and his eyelids grew heavy, she let the melody fade naturally, the final note hanging in the air before dissolving into the ambient music that now seemed unbearably loud by comparison. She rose from her crouched position slowly, her knees aching from the hard floor, and turned to face Khalid. "I am sorry for interrupting," she said quietly, her English carrying the soft accent of the Levant. "I know it was not my place." Khalid tried to respond, but his voice failed. This man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals, who had addressed rooms of world leaders, who had never been at a loss for words in his adult life, now stood mute in front of a woman who earned less in a month than he spent on a single dinner. He swallowed hard and managed 3 words. "How did you?" "My grandmother," Amira said. And then, realizing she was still on the clock, She added, "Please, if you need anything else, call me." She turned and walked back toward the service station, her hands trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was receding. The restaurant gradually resumed its normal rhythm, but something had changed. The wealthy patrons, who moments ago had stared with disapproval at the disruption, now stared with a different kind of intensity. They had witnessed a crisis transformed into a miracle, and even the most cynical among them could not pretend otherwise. Conversations buzzed at every table. Who was she? What was that song? Did anyone record it? Someone had, of course. In an age where every moment is captured, a young influencer named Tamara, seated 2 tables away with 17,000 Instagram followers and an instinct for viral content, had filmed the entire scene. She had started recording when Khaled shouted, expecting to capture a billionaire's meltdown for her followers. What she got instead was something far more valuable, a raw, unfiltered moment of human connection that would ignite the internet within hours. By midnight, the video was everywhere. Tamara posted it with the caption, "Billionaire screams, 'Control my son or get out,' then a waitress from Jordan does this." Within 60 minutes, it had 40,000 views. Within 3 hours, 500,000. By morning, the number crossed 7 million. The hashtags proliferated like wildfire: Bedouin Lullaby, Waitress Hero, Autism Awareness, Dubai Miracle. News outlets in 5 languages scrambled to identify the woman in the white blouse. Morning shows ran the clip on loop, inviting child psychologists, autism specialists, and music therapists to explain what had happened. One expert, a neuroscientist from the University of California, described the phenomenon as auditory entrainment of the parasympathetic nervous system. Essentially, the lullaby's steady tempo had helped Omar's brainwaves synchronize with a calm state, overriding the fight-or-flight response that had hijacked his system. "It's science," the expert said, "but it's also something much older than science." But here is what nobody knew that first night. Amira Bishara was undocumented. Her tourist visa had expired 3 years ago. She had been working under a false name, paying an agent to keep her under the radar of the immigration authorities. Every day she woke up knowing it could be her last in the country. Every police checkpoint made her heart race. Every knock at the door of her shared apartment in Deira triggered a spike of terror. She had built a fragile existence on the margins of a city that did not officially recognize her, and now her face was being broadcast across the entire world. The very visibility that was turning her into a hero was also the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to her. The next morning, Amira arrived at La Perle for her scheduled shift without any idea of what had occurred online. She did not own a smartphone. The cheap flip phone she used for calls had no internet. When she walked through the staff entrance, the sous chef, a grizzled Egyptian named Mahmoud, grabbed her by the shoulders with an expression she could not read. "Have you seen it?" he demanded. "Seen what?" she asked. Mahmoud pulled out his phone and showed her the video. The view count now over 12 million. Amira watched herself crouching beside Omar, the melody captured clearly, the boy's transformation unfolding in high definition. Her blood ran cold, not from pride or embarrassment, but from fear. Her name, her face, her accent, all of it was now evidence of her unauthorized presence. She had been invisible for 3 years. Invisibility was survival, and now it was gone. Marcel called her into his office before the lunch service. She expected termination, overstepping protocols, intervening in a guest situation, causing a scene that had embarrassed a VIP. These were firing offenses in the luxury hospitality industry. Instead, Marcel poured her a glass of water and spoke with a sincerity she had never seen from him. "I need you to understand what is happening," he said. "That boy's father, Mr. Almansa, has been calling the restaurant since 7 this morning. He wants to meet with you. The media have been calling since 8. We have reporters outside right now. The video has over 15 million views across platforms. People are calling you a hero." The government's official autism authority has issued a statement praising your actions. "You are no longer just a waitress at my restaurant. You are a public figure." Amira stared at the glass of water. A public figure. The phrase felt like a death sentence. Public figures get investigated. Their immigration status gets checked. Their employers get questioned. Everything she had worked for, the money she sent monthly to her ailing father in Irbid, the younger brother she was putting through university, the fragile scaffolding of her illegal life, was now balanced on a knife's edge. Marcel seemed to read her expression. Is there something else, something I should know? She considered lying. Lying was what had kept her alive. Lying was the survival reflex of the undocumented, honed through 1,000 small interactions with authority. But something about Marcel's tone, the unexpected gentleness of it, made her hesitate. My visa, she said quietly. It expired in 2021. I'm not supposed to be here. Marcel closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. He was not heartless. He had suspected, of course, half the workers in Dubai's service industry were navigating some form of documentation gray area, but having it confirmed placed him in an impossible position. If he continued to employ her now that he knew, he was breaking the law. If he fired her, he was casting out a woman who had just saved his restaurant from a potential tragedy. Before he could respond, his desk phone rang. It was Khalid Al-Mansur's personal assistant, asking to schedule a private meeting at the Billionaire's residence that very afternoon. The word private mattered. Khalid had been advised by his public relations team to lean into the positive narrative. The initial headlines, those first few hours before Amira's role became clear, had been brutal. Billionaire abuses autistic son in public. Al-Mansur meltdown shames dynasty. Corporate titan humiliates own child. His brand, built over 3 decades on control and competence, was bleeding. The lullaby video had saved him as much as it had saved Omar. Now the strategy was obvious. Embrace the waitress, publicly thank her, offer her a reward, and reframe the story as a tale of unexpected compassion between wealth and wisdom. The PR team drafted a statement, prepared a check for $100,000, and scheduled a photo opportunity. They did not know that Amira was undocumented. They did not know that the woman they were about to thrust further into the spotlight might be deported because of it. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, a black Mercedes pulled up outside Amira's apartment building in Deira. The neighborhood was not where luxury cars went. Children playing in the streets stopped to stare. Women on balconies craned their necks. Amira descended the stairs in the same modest dress she wore to interviews, clutching a small purse as if it could shield her. She had wrestled all afternoon with the decision to go. Every instinct told her to disappear, to quit her job, to find another city and another false name. But something else held her in place. Not the promise of reward or recognition. Something about Omar. Something about the way his eyes had found hers during the lullaby, the silent plea in them that she recognized because she had seen it before, in refugee camps, in desert tents, in children whose nervous systems were screaming for an anchor. Walking away felt like abandoning a thread that still needed to be pulled. The Mercedes delivered her to the gates of Khalid's estate on the Palm Jumeirah, a sprawling compound that occupied an entire frond of the artificial island. Security guards in dark suits checked her identification, her expired passport, the only document she had, and waved the car through. The house rose from manicured gardens like a palace from the pages of a storybook, all white columns and reflecting pools and windows that captured the gold of the afternoon sun. Amira had cleaned rooms for wealthy families before, but she had never entered their homes as an invited guest. The feeling was disorienting, as if gravity had temporarily reversed itself. Khalid met her in a room designed specifically for Omar. She knew it the moment she stepped inside. The lighting was soft and indirect, amber-toned rather than white. The walls were padded with sound-absorbing panels. There were no sharp corners, no chaotic patterns, no overwhelming visual stimuli. It was a sensory sanctuary, clearly designed by specialists, clearly expensive beyond measure. And yet, until last night, it had not been enough. Because the room could not follow Omar into the world. The world still had to be navigated, and the world was not padded. Omar sat on a large floor cushion, arranging wooden blocks by size. When Amira entered, he looked up briefly, and something flickered across his face, not recognition exactly, but a kind of calm curiosity, as if the sound of her footsteps triggered a memory of the lullaby. Khalid stood near the window, looking older than his 58 years. He dismissed the assistant who had escorted her, and when the door closed, he spoke without preamble. I have not been able to calm him like that since his mother died, he said. Not once. 11 months, I have tried everything. He paused, his jaw working. I need to know what you know, I need to understand what you did, and I need to ask you something else. Tell me, what can I give you? What do you need? Anything, name it. Amira looked at him, this titan of industry reduced to raw vulnerability in a room designed for his son's comfort. She thought about the $100,000 she assumed he would offer. She thought about the news coverage. She thought about her expired visa and her father's medical bills and her brother's tuition and the 1,000 little fractures that threatened to shatter her precarious existence. And she realized in that moment that what she needed could not be written on a check. Mr. Almansa, she said, what I need, you cannot simply give. I am not supposed to be in this country. And now the whole world has seen my face. Khalid stared at her, and for several seconds the only sound in the room was Omar quietly arranging his blocks. He was a man who had mastered the art of seeing around corners, market shifts, regulatory traps, the hidden vulnerabilities in a competitor's balance sheet. He had not seen this. He had been so consumed by his own humiliation, then by his own gratitude, that he had failed to ask the simplest question. Who is this woman actually? What does she risk by being here? The answer was now in front of him, and it rewrote everything. Tell me everything, he said. From the beginning, Amira had never told the full story to anyone in Dubai. Undocumented workers live in compartments, sharing fragments of truth with different people, never the whole picture. But something about this room, the soft amber light, the quiet dignity of the boy on the cushion, gave her permission to be whole for the first time in 3 years. She told him about her grandmother Rashid, the healer of the Wadi Rum. She told him about the drought that killed their goats, the war that sent refugees pouring across the border, the slow erosion of a way of life that had sustained their tribe for centuries. She told him about the agent in Amman who took $3,000 in exchange for a work visa that turned out to be forged, a document that fell apart the moment immigration officials in Dubai subjected it to the new biometric scanners they had installed only weeks before she arrived. She told him about the fear, the constant low-grade terror that shaped every decision, which streets to walk, which employers to trust, which hospitals to avoid when she was sick because hospitals asked for Emirates ID cards she could not produce. And then she told him about the other part, the part that mattered for Omar. The techniques her grandmother had taught her were not just a single lullaby. They were a whole system, refined over centuries, for calming dysregulated nervous systems. Rashid had treated children with conditions that the modern world would later label as autism, sensory processing disorder, trauma-induced mutism. The desert had always understood what neuroscience was only now confirming, that predictable rhythm, gentle pressure points, and the low frequencies of the human voice could re-regulate a brain in distress. Amira had helped treat children in refugee camps who had witnessed horrors, children who had stopped speaking entirely, children whose bodies were locked in permanent fight or flight. The lullaby was just the entry point. Khalid listened without interruption. When she finished, he rose and walked to the window. Outside, the Persian Gulf glittered under the late afternoon sun. His empire spread across 3 continents, his influence reached into governments and central banks, and yet he was confronting a problem that could not be solved with any of it. Immigration law was not flexible. The UAE system was famously strict on visa overstayers, and a high-profile case would only attract more scrutiny. If he used his connections to pressure the authorities, he risked a scandal that could damage the very people he was trying to help. If he did nothing, the woman who had saved his son would be deported to Jordan, leaving Omar without the first person to reach him in 11 months. But here is the twist that changed everything. By the following morning, someone had already decided for him. A tabloid journalist named Rainier Fade, known for digging through the backgrounds of the UAE's Suddenly Famous, had obtained Amira's immigration file from a source inside the General Directorate of Residency and Foreigners Affairs. How she got it remains a matter of dispute. What is certain is that at 8:17 a.m., her publication ran a story with the headline, "Hero Waitress is actually an illegal overstayer, Dubai's miracle woman could face prison. The article detailed Amira's expired visa, her use of a false name, her employment in violation of labor law, and the potential penalties, up to 3 years imprisonment followed by deportation. It included photos of her apartment building in Deira, her shift schedule at La Perle, even the name of the agent who had arranged her forged documents. The internet, which had spent the previous 36 hours turning Amira into a saint, now pivoted with the speed that only the internet can manage. Comment sections that had praised her courage now debated whether she should be punished. One faction argued that the law was the law and that no act of kindness could excuse years of illegal residence. Another faction argued that this woman had done more good in one evening than most citizens did in a lifetime, and that deporting her would be a moral failure. Politicians weighed in. Talk show hosts framed it as a clash between rule of law and human compassion. Immigration hardliners saw an opportunity to make an example. Human rights groups saw an opportunity to expose the vulnerabilities of the UAE's vast migrant workforce. Amira Bishara had become a symbol she never asked to be, and symbols get crushed between the forces they represent. Marcel called her at her apartment that morning, his voice strained. He had been instructed by the restaurant's owners to suspend her employment immediately pending an investigation into her immigration status. The owners were not cruel. They were terrified. Employing an undocumented worker carried fines of up to 50,000 dirhams per employee. If the authorities decided to audit La Perle's entire workforce, they could uncover dozens more violations. Marcel promised her he would do what he could, but his voice told her what she already knew. He could do nothing. Then the police arrived, not for Amira directly, but for the building's landlord, a man named Hamid who rented beds in a partitioned apartment to 15 undocumented workers. Someone had reported him, perhaps the same source who had leaked Amira's file, perhaps a neighbor who saw the cameras gathered outside. The police came not with sirens, but with quiet efficiency, taking names, checking documents, loading several of Amira's roommates into a van for processing. Amira herself was not in the apartment at that hour. She had been out buying bread, but when she returned and saw the empty rooms, the scattered belongings, the terror of the women who remained, she understood that the net was closing. The safe invisibility she had cultivated for 3 years was gone. Every minute she remained in the open was borrowed time. She called Khalid from her flip phone, not because she expected him to fix it, but because she had nowhere else to turn. His assistant David answered and patched her through immediately. Khalid had been in meetings all morning, trying to find a legal pathway through the thicket of immigration regulations. There were options, his lawyers told him, but none that could be executed quickly. A humanitarian visa, an employment sponsorship if a company could demonstrate her unique skills, a temporary waiver from the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratization. All of these required paperwork, approvals, the alignment of bureaucratic stars over weeks or months. Amira did not have weeks. The journalist's story had accelerated the timeline. The authorities would have to act now visibly to demonstrate that the law applied equally to viral heroes as it did to anonymous laborers. They had no choice but to pursue her. The safest thing, Khalid told her on the phone, might be for you to come to my estate. The security here can keep the press away, and if the police come, we will have lawyers present. He paused, but you need to understand. If you enter my home and the authorities decide to arrest you there, I cannot shield you. I can only make sure you have representation. Do you trust me? It was a question that had never been asked of her in the Gulf. Trust was a luxury of the documented, the powerful, the safe. Amira had been trusting only herself since the day she landed with a forged visa. But she looked at the empty apartment, at the terrified faces of the women still hiding in the back room, and she knew that trusting no one was no longer a viable strategy. I trust you, she said. The black Mercedes arrived within the hour. This time, the journey felt different. Not a ride to a meeting, but a ride to sanctuary or to a gilded cage, depending on how the next days unfolded. At the estate, Omar was waiting for her in the sensory room. The moment she walked in, he looked up from his blocks and made a sound she had not heard from him before, a soft, questioning hum, almost musical. It was not the lullaby exactly, but it was something adjacent, as if the melody she had sung 3 nights ago had planted a seed and a small green shoot was now pushing through soil. Amira knelt beside him and hummed the opening bars. Omar hummed back, a wavering but recognizable echo. Khalid, watching from the doorway, felt his throat tighten, but outside the walls of the estate, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The story had gone global, and it was no longer one story but two, fused together like unstable elements. Narrative 1, billionaire father fails to connect with autistic son, waitress steps in with ancient wisdom, son responds, hearts melt. Narrative 2, waitress is an illegal immigrant, a visa fraudster, a symbol of the undocumented millions who live in the Gulf's shadows. The two narratives pulled in opposite directions, and Amira was the rope being torn between them. On Twitter, a hashtag trended in Arabic, "Deportation is justice, not cruelty." Another trended in English, "Protect her." A prominent Emirati influencer with millions of followers posted a video arguing that rule of law was the foundation of civilization and that no emotional appeal should override it. A sheikh known for his charitable work posted a cryptic quote from the Quran about mercy being higher than law. The royal court remained silent, but everyone knew silence was itself a signal. Then came the worst day, the day that broke everything open again. The UAE's Federal Authority for Identity, Citizenship, Customs and Port Security issued a statement. It was couched in bureaucratic language, but the meaning was unmistakable. The case was under review. If the woman in question had committed immigration violations, those violations would be addressed in accordance with the law. However, the authority also noted that exceptional humanitarian circumstances could be considered in the exercise of prosecutorial discretion. It was a door cracked open, but only a crack, and the wind blowing through it was cold. The same day, Amira's brother in Irbid called her panicked. Reporters had shown up at their father's house. They were asking questions about the family, about Amira's departure from Jordan, about her grandmother. Her father, already frail from a stroke 2 years earlier, had become so agitated that a neighbor had called a doctor. Amira listened to her brother's voice shaking with fear and felt the full weight of what visibility had cost. She had sent money home every month to protect her family. Now she was the source of their endangerment. That night, Khalid did something unexpected. He called a meeting not of his legal team, but of his household staff, his drivers, his cooks, his cleaners. Every one of them was a migrant worker. Every one of them understood the precarity that Amira faced. He sat them down in the estate's main hall, a room usually reserved for business negotiations with ministers and CEOs, and he asked them to tell him their stories. Not the sanitized versions they told employers, the real ones. For 2 hours, Khalid listened. He heard about recruitment fees that trapped workers in debt. He heard about passports held by sponsors without consent. He heard about illnesses left untreated because a hospital visit meant exposing an expired visa. He heard about children left behind in Kerala, in Manila, in Addis Ababa for years at a time. And he understood, with the force of a revelation, that Amira's story was not exceptional. It was the norm. He had built an empire on the labor of people who lived exactly as she did, and he had never truly seen them until she forced him to look. The next morning, Khalid convened his board of directors. His proposal was radical. He wanted to establish a foundation not just for autism, his initial plan, but for all migrant workers facing legal crises that threatened their families. He would fund legal assistance, emergency housing, and pathways to regularization. He would leverage his political connections to advocate for reforms in the kafala sponsorship system, and he wanted Amira Bishara to be the public face of the initiative. His board was divided. Some members saw the public relations value. Others warned that antagonizing the government on immigration policy would endanger the company's lucrative contracts. The debate lasted 6 hours. While they debated, Amira sat with Omar in the sensory room, teaching him a pressure point technique that Rashid had used on overstimulated children. It involved a gentle circular motion at the base of the skull, a place where the brainstem met the spine. Omar allowed the touch. He even leaned into it. And then, for the first time in 11 months, He spoke a word he had not said since his mother's death. "Mama," he whispered, not calling for Layla, but simply remembering a sound associated with comfort. Amira's tears fell onto the cushion. She understood that whatever happened next, this moment could not be taken from her. The board voted narrowly in favor, but the vote meant nothing if the authorities moved first, and they were about to. At 7 the next morning, 2 officers from the immigration authority arrived at the estate's main gate. They were polite, formal, and carrying an order for Amira Bishara to appear for an interview at the detention center in Al-Awiya. It was not an arrest warrant, not yet, but it was the step before one. If she went, she might not return. If she fled, she would become a fugitive, destroying any chance of legal resolution and abandoning her family to even worse trouble. The officers gave her until 9 a.m. to present herself. Khalid looked at the document, then at Amira, then at his phone, where a single message from a contact inside the ministry was waiting. It read, "Use the humanity clause. Submit the request now. The window is small." The humanity clause, a rarely invoked provision in the immigration law that allowed the Minister of Interior to grant residency on exceptional humanitarian grounds. It required evidence of extraordinary contribution to the state, a clean record aside from the immigration violations, and the sponsorship of a UAE national of good standing. Khalid was not a national, he was a resident with a golden visa, but he had partners who were. The window was hours, not days, and the evidence of extraordinary contribution was playing on a loop in every news cycle. A waitress with a Bedouin lullaby calming a child when money and specialists had failed. The question now was whether the authorities would see a hero worth keeping or an illegal immigrant worth making an example of. The answer would come before the sun set. Khalid did not sleep that night. His legal team occupied the estate's conference room, a space designed for hostile takeovers and international arbitrations, now turned into a command center for a different kind of fight. The Humanity Clause application required a dossier that would make a Supreme Court appeal look thin. Evidence of extraordinary contribution, certified translations of character statements, medical records proving the technique's efficacy, a detailed timeline of Amira's immigration history, and most critically, a sponsorship letter from a UAE national of impeccable standing. The team worked in shifts, fueled by coffee and the pressure of a deadline that made no concessions. At 5:17 in the morning, Khalid made the call he had been dreading. Sheikh Abdullah bin Rashid Al Maktoum, a senior member of the royal family and the chairman of 3 charitable foundations, had been following the story closely. His cryptic Quranic post about mercy had been no accident. He was known for quiet interventions in cases where strict law and human decency collided, always behind the scenes, never for credit. When Khalid's private line rang in his palace study, the sheikh answered on the second tone. "I've been expecting this call," he said. "You know what I need from you, not money, not promises. A guarantee that this woman's work continues, that it's not a publicity stunt. If I put my name on this, she becomes family in the eyes of the state. I need to know she's worthy of that." Khalid told him about the sensory room, about Omar's first word in 11 months, about the pressure point technique, about the century-old lineage of Bedouin healing that Amira carried in her bones. He told him about the roommates taken away in vans, about the father in Jordan frightened into a medical crisis, about the fragile web of migrant lives that the law too often crushed without ever seeing. He told him about the foundation he planned to build, not just for autism, but for all the invisible workers whose labor made the nation shine. When he finished, there was a long silence. "Send me the papers," Sheikh Abdullah said. "I'll have my office issue the sponsorship letter by 8, but you must understand, this does not guarantee the ministry will approve. It only guarantees they will look. The decision remains theirs." By 7 o'clock, the dossier was nearly complete. A specialist in rare immigration cases, a sharp-eyed Emirati lawyer named Fatima Al-Hashimi, had been flown in from Abu Dhabi at 3 a.m. She had reviewed the application, circled the strongest points, and drafted a cover letter that framed Amira's contribution as a matter of national pride. "This woman has demonstrated that the UAE is a place where ancient wisdom and modern compassion intersect. she wrote. Granting her legal residency would affirm the nation's commitment to valuing human dignity above rigid procedure. Amira spent those hours in the sensory room with Omar, not because she was hiding, but because she could not bear to pace the conference room watching lawyers argue over her fate. She had resolved that whatever happened, she would make these moments count. Omar, as if sensing the gravity of the morning, was unusually alert. He initiated the lullaby himself, humming the first 3 notes, looking at her expectantly. She joined him, and together they moved through the melody, call and response, a duet that needed no words. When they finished, Omar placed a wooden block in her hand. It was blue, his favorite color, a gift, a communication beyond language. At 7:43, a social worker from the Ministry of Community Development arrived unannounced. She was a calm woman in her 50s named Maryam, and she had been sent to assess the situation independently. The ministry wanted its own report on whether Amira's claims of specialized healing knowledge were genuine or exaggerated. Maryam observed Amira with Omar for nearly 40 minutes, taking notes on a tablet, asking occasional questions through an interpreter. She watched the lullaby, the pressure point technique, the way Omar's nervous system responded with visible relaxation. She interviewed the estate's staff about Amira's character. She spoke to Omar's regular therapist, who confirmed that the boy's progress over the past week had been unprecedented. When she left, she told Khalid only one thing: "I will file my report favorably. Whether it matters is not my decision." At 8:41, the application was submitted electronically to the Ministry of Interior's Exceptional Cases Division. A confirmation receipt arrived at 8:43. Khalid's contact inside the ministry, a senior undersecretary named Rashid, sent a 2-word message: "Received, waiting." At 8:49, the immigration officers at the main gate received a call. Their orders were updated. The woman was not to be taken into custody while a formal humanitarian application was pending. They were to return to the Al-Awiya Center and await further instructions. The officer in charge, a captain named Hamdan, nodded curtly, folded the order into his pocket, and without a word, the patrol car pulled away. Amira collapsed into a chair and wept. It was not over, not by a long measure, but she had survived the morning. She would not spend the day in a detention cell. The next 72 hours were a crucible of public pressure. The tabloid journalist Rainier Fade, seeing which way the wind was blowing, pivoted hard. She published a follow-up piece titled "What I Got Wrong About the Miracle Waitress," in which she interviewed autism experts who confirmed that Amira's technique was consistent with emerging research on rhythmic auditory stimulation, a legitimate therapeutic approach that used predictable sound patterns to regulate the autonomic nervous system. The piece included a quote from a Harvard neurologist who said, "What this woman is doing appears to be a folk variant of established sensory integration therapy. The grandmother may not have had a PhD, but she clearly had empirical knowledge." The story's viral arc shifted from scandal to redemption. Meanwhile, a petition on an international platform demanding Amira's legalization gathered over 400,000 signatures in 2 days. Human Rights Watch issued a statement of cautious support, noting that the case highlighted the vulnerability of the UAE's migrant workforce, but also demonstrating that exceptions could be made when public attention aligned with humanitarian principles. Several Gulf news outlets ran editorials arguing that deporting the lullaby waitress would be a public relations disaster at a moment when the nation was working to position itself as a global capital of tolerance. But the most powerful advocacy came from an unexpected quarter. A group of Emirati mothers whose children had autism formed an informal coalition. They recorded videos of their own children, described their own struggles, and pleaded with the authorities to recognize that Amira's gift transcended her paperwork. One mother, a woman from a prominent Abu Dhabi family named Aisha, spoke directly to camera with tears streaming. "I have spent years trying to find someone who could reach my son the way this woman reached Omar. If you deport her, you are deporting hope for thousands of families like mine." The video was shared by a member of the Federal National Council, the UAE's advisory parliamentary body, with a caption that read simply, please listen." At midday on the third day, the Ministry of Interior's press office announced that a decision would be rendered within 24 hours. No further details were provided, but the language was notably neutral, even cautiously positive. The phrase, "exceptional humanitarian grounds," appeared in the official statement for the first time. That evening, Sheikh Abdullah visited the Al Mansur estate personally. He was not accompanied by aides or security, only a driver who waited in the car. He met Amira in the sensory room, with Omar present, and asked her to show him the lullaby. She hummed it softly, her voice carrying the ancient Bedouin cadence. Omar hummed along, and then unexpectedly he reached out and took the Sheikh's hand. The old man's eyes glistened. He did not speak for a long while. Then he said, "My own grandson has this condition. I have never seen him respond to a stranger this way. You are a gift. I will see this through." The next morning, at 10:15, the Minister of Interior himself issued the decision. It was read aloud by a ministry spokesperson at a press conference, but the key passage was all that mattered. Pursuant to Article 28 of the Immigration Law, the Minister of Interior has exercised his discretionary authority to grant Amira Bishara a 3-year residency permit on exceptional humanitarian grounds. This decision reflects the United Arab Emirates' commitment to recognizing those who contribute positively to our society, regardless of origin or circumstance. In the sensory room, watching the announcement on a tablet, Amira's legs gave out. She slid to the floor, her hands covering her face, years of fear draining out of her like water from a cracked vessel. Omar, confused by her tears but sensing something important, crawled over and placed his head on her shoulder. Khalid stood in the doorway, not intruding, his own eyes wet. The normalization of Amira's status set off a cascade of legal and practical changes. Within a week, she had an Emirates ID card, a legitimate employment contract with the Al Mansur Group, and a bank account in her own name. Her roommates who had been detained were released, their cases reviewed, several of them finding sponsorship through the foundation. Khalid was now building at full speed. Her father in Irbid received the news through a video call, his frail face breaking into a smile that Amira had not seen since before the war. Her brother could now walk to university without fear that journalists would ambush him. And the foundation, the Al Mansur Dignity Initiative, launched officially 3 months later with an endowment of $200 million. Its dual mission, to bring traditional healing practices into dialogue with modern autism therapy, and to provide legal support for migrant workers facing immigration crises. Amira was appointed as the Foundation's Chief Cultural Officer, a title that made her laugh the first time she saw it on a business card. She had never had a business card before. She sent the first one to her grandmother, but the deepest transformation was in the Al Mansur household itself. Khalid, who had spent a decade outsourcing Omar's care to specialists, now spent 2 hours every day in the sensory room, learning from Amira the techniques that no degree could teach. He learned the lullaby, note by note, until his deep baritone could carry the melody almost as well as her softer voice. He learned the pressure points, the breathing exercises, the art of reading Omar's subtle signals before a meltdown escalated. He was clumsy at first, too forceful in his touch, too impatient in his expectations. But Amira was a patient teacher, and Omar, sensing his father's effort, began to respond in ways that rewired their entire relationship. One evening, 6 months after the restaurant incident, Khalid and Omar sat together on the floor cushion, humming the lullaby in unison. When they finished, Omar looked at his father and said, with perfect clarity, "Safe." It was the first unprompted word he had spoken to Khalid in over a year. Khalid pulled his son into his arms and sobbed into his small shoulder. The surprising detail that nobody expected came from an address book. While clearing out Rashid's modest home in Wadi Rum, preparing to move the 92-year-old matriarch into a more comfortable residence funded by the foundation, Amira found a worn leather notebook tucked behind a loose stone in the wall. Inside, in her grandmother's meticulous Arabic script, were records of every child she had treated over 60 years. Names, dates, symptoms, techniques used, outcomes. More than 700 cases. And on the very first page, dated 1952, was a description of a child who matched Omar's profile almost exactly, a 5-year-old boy from a neighboring tribe who had never spoken, who screamed at loud sounds, who rocked for hours, and whom everyone had dismissed as unreachable. Next to the entry, Rashid had written a single sentence. The old lullaby reached him. After 3 days, he said his first word. It was his mother's name. The lullaby was not just a comfort. It was a code, a key that generations of Bedouin healers had refined for children whose brains were wired differently, whose sensory worlds were too intense, whose families had run out of answers. Amira had unlocked it for Omar. Now, with the Foundation's resources, she would help document it, study it scientifically, and teach it to therapists around the world. At the Foundation's inaugural conference in Dubai, Amira took the stage in front of an audience of 2,000 people. She wore a simple dress, her grandmother's silver locket around her neck. She did not use notes. She spoke in English, then in Arabic, her voice steady. 3 years ago, she said, I was invisible. I cleaned rooms and served meals and prayed that no one would notice me, but invisible does not mean worthless. The knowledge my grandmother gave me was invisible to the world, but it was real. It was powerful. It saved a child when money and machines could not. Tonight I am no longer invisible, and neither are the millions of workers who keep this city running. They are mothers and fathers and healers and dreamers. They carry knowledge the world needs. I am proof. The applause lasted for 5 minutes. Khalid, seated in the front row, clapped until his palms were sore. Omar, seated beside him with noise-canceling headphones, watched his friend on stage and hummed the first bars of the lullaby quietly to himself. He was ready. They all were. The story of Amira and Omar spread far beyond Dubai. Within a year, the Al-Mansa Dignity Initiative had established training centers in Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt, each one teaching the lullaby technique to parents, therapists, and social workers who serve displaced communities. Researchers from 3 universities launched a formal study of Rashid's methods, using functional MRI to map the neural changes that occurred when children like Omar heard those ancient melodies. The preliminary results confirmed what Bedouin grandmothers had known for centuries: the brain's default mode network, the part responsible for self-regulation and emotional processing, activated measurably when exposed to the rhythmic patterns embedded in the lullaby. Science was catching up to wisdom, but the broader question lingered, and it had little to do with autism. It had to do with invisibility. How many other healers, innovators, and problem solvers were hiding in plain sight, their gifts buried under expired visas and false names? How many grandmothers in refugee camps held knowledge that could transform medicine, agriculture, education? If only the world had the humility to listen. The restaurant at La Perle was a microcosm, a billionaire who could buy anything but his son's peace, a waitress who possessed the priceless intangibles that money cannot manufacture, and a society that nearly deported her because her paperwork was incomplete. The miracle was not just that Amira saved Omar. The miracle was that the system, against its own rigid logic, made space for her to stay. Omar is now 10 years old. He attends a specialized school where the lullaby is part of his daily routine. His vocabulary has grown to over 200 words. He still arranges blocks by color, still wears headphones in loud places, still struggles with the sensory chaos that his brain amplifies. But he has something he did not have before that night at La Perle: a father who understands him, and a woman who taught that father how to listen. Khalid often says that the $100 million donation was the easy part. The hard part was admitting that he did not have the answers, that the solutions to his most personal crisis came not from wealth or status, but from a stranger's voice carrying a song older than his entire empire. Amira continues to serve as the Foundation's cultural director. She brought her grandmother to Dubai for the first time last spring. Rashid, now 93 and nearly blind, sat in the sensory room and listened as Omar hummed the lullaby she had learned from her own grandmother 8 decades ago. She did not need to see his face. She could hear the calm in his breathing, the steadiness in his rhythm. She reached out, found his hand, and held it. No words were necessary. The circle was complete. As for the restaurant, La Perle now includes a line in its employee handbook that Marcel added personally. Every worker in this establishment carries knowledge we cannot see. Our job is not just to serve. Our job is to recognize. It is a small gesture, a single sentence in a document few will read, but it marks a shift. The wait staff, the cleaners, the dishwashers, they are no longer invisible there. They are people with histories, with skills, with songs that might just save a life. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that wisdom wears work uniforms and speaks with accents, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Like this video so others can find it. And in the comments, tell us about someone you know whose gifts the world overlooks. Who in your life carries a lullaby the rest of us need to hear? Thank you for watching. The next story is already in the making, and you will not want to miss it. Until then, remember, the most powerful forces on earth are not wealth or fame. They are compassion passed down through generations and the courage to sing when everyone else has fallen silent.